Robert Mugabe's name is synonymous with Zimbabwe, a figure who dominated the nation's political landscape for nearly 4 decades. His story is one of initial promise, ultimately giving way to authoritarian rule and economic turmoil. From independence in 1980, when the nation cast off the shackles of colonial rule, he led the country, first as prime minister, a position he held with considerable influence, then transitioning to the role of president. His early years brought a wave of hope and optimism across the newly formed nation, expanding access to education for all, regardless of race or background, and improving healthcare services, particularly for the black majority who had been historically underserved. But as time went on, Mugabe's leadership style took a dark turn, his rule becoming increasingly authoritarian, marked by a growing intolerance of dissent, crushing any form of political opposition with force and intimidation, and consolidating power within his own hands and those of his inner circle, effectively creating a one-party state. Controversial land reforms, implemented in the 2000s, with the stated goal of addressing historical inequalities, triggered a devastating economic collapse, sending the nation into a downward spiral. Hyperinflation eroded savings, and widespread food shortages left many struggling to survive. By the 2010s, Zimbabwe was mired in a deep and multifaceted crisis. Unemployment soared to unprecedented levels, leaving a generation without prospects, public services crumbled under the strain of neglect and corruption, and Mugabe, well into his 90s, remained firmly entrenched in power, seemingly unwilling to relinquish control. ZANU-PF, his long-ruling party, fractured into rival factions, each vying for influence and control in the post-Mugabe era, one faction backing his ambitious and controversial wife Grace, while the other threw its weight behind the seasoned Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa, a veteran of the liberation struggle. The nation's future hung precariously in the balance, clouded by uncertainty and political intrigue as the succession battle intensified, threatening to plunge the country into further instability. Tensions within the ruling ZANU-PF party reached fever pitch, fueled by ambition and the looming question of who would succeed the aging leader. This internal strife set the stage for a dramatic and unexpected showdown that would ultimately determine the fate of Zimbabwe. The coming power struggle, brewing beneath the surface for years, was poised to reshape Zimbabwe's destiny in profound and irreversible ways. The seeds of the crisis that would grip Zimbabwe were sown over time, escalating tensions reaching a boiling point. The situation dramatically erupted when Mugabe, after decades in power, made a move that would ultimately seal his fate. In November 2017, he fired Vice President Mnangagwa, a longtime ally. This dismissal was widely interpreted as clearing the path for his wife, Grace Mugabe, to potentially succeed him, a move that sparked widespread discontent. Mnangagwa, a seasoned political figure and a liberation war veteran with deep ties to the military establishment, was not going to accept this quietly. He was forced to flee the country, seeking refuge abroad, but not before vowing to return and challenge the unfolding events. His unceremonious ouster deeply alienated the military, who viewed Mnangagwa as one of their own and a guardian of the nation's liberation legacy. They saw Grace Mugabe as unfit to lead the country, lacking the experience and gravitas necessary to guide Zimbabwe through its challenges. General Chiwenga, the commander of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces, became increasingly alarmed by what he perceived as a purge of liberation-era leaders and the growing influence of Grace Mugabe. He took the extraordinary step of issuing a public warning, a clear sign of the military's growing discontent. In no uncertain terms, the military declared that they would be compelled to intervene if the ruling party continued down what they saw as a destructive and destabilizing path. This bold statement represented an unprecedented and direct challenge to Mugabe's authority. A challenge that had been brewing beneath the surface for some time. The military's patience, strained by years of political maneuvering and perceived threats to their influence, had finally run out. Zimbabwe was now teetering on the brink of a dramatic and potentially destabilizing military intervention, a moment that would reshape the country's political landscape. On November 14, 2017, a pivotal moment arrived in Zimbabwe's history. The political landscape, already simmering with discontent, was about to undergo a dramatic shift. Under the cover of night, tanks rolled into Harare, the nation's capital. The rumble of heavy machinery echoed through the streets, signaling a significant disruption to the status quo. The military swiftly seized control of key institutions, including government buildings and broadcasting stations. This strategic maneuver effectively paralyzed the existing power structure. Simultaneously, Robert Mugabe, the long-standing president, was placed under house arrest, effectively ending his decades-long reign. The world watched with bated breath as these events unfolded. In an attempt to allay fears of a military coup, soldiers assured the nation that this was not a power grab, but rather a targeted move against criminals and corrupt elements surrounding the president, who were allegedly undermining the country's progress. Major General Sibusiso Moyo, a prominent figure in the military, appeared on state TV, delivering a carefully worded statement promising Mugabe's safety and a swift return to order and stability. He urged citizens to remain calm and cooperate with the military's efforts. Despite the military presence, the capital remained relatively calm, but the underlying message was unmistakable. Mugabe's long and controversial era was definitively over, ushering in a new chapter for Zimbabwe. Behind the scenes, intense negotiations began, with various factions vying for influence in the post-Mugabe landscape. Military leaders, along with regional envoys from neighboring countries, exerted pressure on Mugabe to resign peacefully, hoping to avoid further instability. However, Mugabe, known for his stubbornness, initially resisted, adamantly refusing to step down from his position. The entire country waited anxiously, suspended in a state of uncertainty, unsure of what the future held. The end of an era was imminent, signaling a profound shift in Zimbabwe's political trajectory. As the standoff dragged on, tensions mounted, and Zimbabweans flooded the streets, their voices growing louder, demanding Mugabe's immediate resignation. Even ZANU-PF, his own party, turned against him, expelling both Mugabe and his wife Grace from the party. Faced with mounting pressure, Parliament began impeachment proceedings, uniting ruling and opposition lawmakers in a rare display of unity. Then suddenly, a letter arrived. Mugabe had resigned from his post. Jubilation erupted across the nation. After 37 long years, his authoritarian rule was finally over. Emerson Mnangagwa swiftly returned from exile and was promptly sworn in as the new president. Hope soared for a new era of prosperity and freedom, though the world watched warily from afar, many calling it a military coup in all but name. Zimbabwe's future remained uncertain, but the long Mugabe era had definitively ended.